Australian pilots involved in a joint airstrike against Islamic State extremists in West Mosul may have killed up to 18 Iraqi civilians. An investigation into the June 2017 bombings has revealed at least 6 Iraqis were probably killed, based on population density figures. However, the exact number of casualties will never be known, nor their definitive cause of death. The airstrikes occurred at the height of the battle for Mosul, when Iraqi security forces were engaged in intense urban warfare against Islamic State militants. As they prepared to advance through the neighborhood of Al-Shafar on June 13, Iraqi soldiers spotted 3 IS fighters holed up inside a building, and 4 more in an adjacent courtyard, all carrying heavy weapons. Fearing their forces would be wiped out, Iraqi commanders requested air support from the US-led coalition. 2 Australian pilots aboard Super Hornets joined the coalition fleet of fighter planes once their mission was legally cleared. One Australian plane dropped a 500-pound GPS precision-guided bomb on the building housing the IS militants, while the other pilot struck at the courtyard. Both high-powered explosives hit their targets and neutralized the threat. An initial post-strike review did not uncover any civilian casualties. However, an investigation was launched 7 months later after it emerged through local and social media channels that civilians in a nearby building could have been killed. A coalition-led investigation which concluded last month found the claims to be credible, and Australian authorities agreed, conceding it was possible the airstrikes caused the unintentional civilian deaths. It is unclear whether the civilians were killed as a result of the Australian strikes, nearby coalition strikes, ground fire from Iraqi soldiers, or at the hands of IS fighters. However, the 2 Australian pilots involved were not found to have acted contrary to the rules of engagement or the laws of armed conflict. Australia's Chief of Joint Operations Mel Hupfeld said the responsibility for taking lethal action at war was a heavy burden to carry. Our pilots and decision-makers involved in the targeting process do everything they can to avoid civilian casualties, but sometimes it is not possible, Air Marshal Hupfeld told reporters in Canberra. This is an extraordinary thing to ask of our young men and women, the gravity of which is not lost on any of us. Air Marshal Hupfeld said there was no specific intelligence to indicate civilians were in the vicinity before the strikes were launched. But he said given the urgent circumstances facing Iraqi forces who requested the strike, it was impossible to be certain. The Chief of Operations originally agreed that had Australia known the proximity of civilians at the time, the weapons would not have been fired. But he said this needed to be balanced against the direct threat of serious injury and death to Iraqi security forces. Air Marshal Hupfeld said coalition forces had relied on intelligence from Iraqi commanders who suggested the likelihood of nearby civilians. However, he was careful not to blame Iraq for the incident. We're very cognizant of the risk of inflicting civilian casualties in a very intense, complex war zone, he said. The action in Mosul was the most ferocious air campaign that we have seen in our generation. It is an unfortunate consequence of war that these civilian casualties occurred. Australia has previously announced involvement in 3 separate potential civilian casualty allegations resulting from strikes conducted during Operation Okra. These all occurred during the Mosul offensive on the 30th of March 2017, the 3rd of May 2017, and the 7th of June 2017. Australian strike aircraft concluded operations in January 2018. More than 33,000 airstrikes have been launched during the campaign to defeat Islamic State, claiming at least 1,000 civilian lives, while liberating more than 8 million Iraqis from their self-described caliphate. Australia still has about 600 soldiers deployed in Iraq, where IS is now largely suppressed. At its peak, the terrorist group occupied a third of Iraqi territory. Australia has previously announced involvement in 3 separate potential civilian casualty allegations resulting from strikes conducted during Operation Okra. These all occurred during the Mosul offensive on the 30th of March 2017, the 3rd of May 2017, and the 7th of June 2017. Australian strike aircraft concluded operations in January 2018.